Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition of the History Channel, we're going to be talking about Liberia's era of economic freedom. There was a time in the history of our country that we had good and very prosperous business people. They did pretty well. So we call that era the era of economic freedom. So we're going to look at it. It has not all been politics and fighting and what you did know. We had time where, money talked. Well, tonight let me welcome our presenter here, Carl Famwell. Carl, welcome to the show.
It's always my pleasure to be here.
Let me also welcome Basa Barry, our co-presenter tonight, Mr. Darius Lam, aka Jabari. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be back on.
We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. Always join us on Wednesday at this time for the Liberia History Channel. This is the only place in the history of our country where we discuss Liberia history. Everywhere else, you get the noise. Here, let's talk about history. And let me start with Carl. Set the stage for us. Why this topic?
It's important because I think many of us feel that Liberians have always been dependent upon foreigners to invest in the prosperity of Liberia. When I say foreigners, I mean non-Liberian citizens. And there was a time when the economic sector in Liberia was driven by Liberians. And the wealthiest people in Liberia were Liberians. And we never talk about that because it hasn't been that way for a very long time. In previous episodes, we've discussed how Firestone and the economic annexation of Liberia had taken the economy out of the hands of wealthy merchants, traders, and farmers, and basically shifted everything towards Firestone rubber production. Before that, you had business people trading under very difficult circumstances. I'm not going to make it sound like it was, peachy clean. We know that there were economic embargoes against Liberia from the moment she asserted her sovereignty or independence in 1847. But in spite of that, in spite of economic embargoes and backlash, there was still surprisingly a very solid number of people who were economically prosperous, able to create jobs, wealth, able to travel, able to build vessels. Many of those people, those wealthy merchants, rose to become presidents. And we're not going to discuss the presidents today, though. We're going to talk about people who either got into politics and just really at a lower level, or people who didn't get into politics at all. Most of the wealthy merchants in Liberia did not get into politics. Those who did served as representatives and senators so that they could protect the economic interest of themselves and the communities that they came from. But they were wealthy. Most of these people were extremely wealthy before even getting into politics. And we'll talk about a few life sketches of a few of them, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Let me go to Basa Barry. What excites you about this topic?
I think it's important because oftentimes when we talk about Liberian history or we talk about, successful Liberians, usually they're politicians, usually they are people that have been either in the Ministry of Education, they've been in the other different ministries, and so you really don't get the information about, people who were not necessarily political, people who were in the economic sphere. You don't really get that, hey, this person was a successful, engineer. This person was a successful carpenter. This person created a successful manufacturing company. That's not really talked about. So I think it's important that we really dive into this so that people understand it's not just politicians that were successful, and you don't have to aspire to just be a politician to be successful. You can be an astronaut, you can be a carpenter, you can be a maritime owner and still live a good life.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, let's begin our presentation for the night.
Yes, sir. We are going to talk about one of my favorite people that emigrated to Liberia, Thomas Holland, who, interestingly enough, was a politician, but not in Liberia. He was a politician in Rhode Island. Holland was the first um, African American person of African descent to be elected to office in the state of Rhode Island. But you can read a little bit about him and then I'll get into more details.
Thomas Harlan. He appraises us through the pinch with a skeptical look. His eyebrow raised and his mouth nearly a smirk, or is that a smile of cynical disappointment? Thomas Harlan was a handsome man with a modern aspect. His arm draped casually over the curved chair back. In the background, a man lashes a tin of horses, perhaps in symbolic reference to Harlan's career as a stevedore, unloading ships and moving cargo on the Providence Wharf. In this portrait by local stonecutter and artist John Blanchard, the setter's inner life rises to the surface. We don't know exactly when the portrait was made, but it must have been made before Harlan, along with his wife and something.
Emigrated to Liberia in 1857. Now, Holland was elected for office in Rhode Island. And at that time, it was just before the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott was a case which basically said that African Americans were not citizens. So before the Dred Scott, before the Dred Scott case, if you were free and you were black, before 1857, your constituents could technically, especially in these northern states, could technically elect you. So he was elected to office. He owned a store in Providence. He had a store. He worked, as you just read, as a commodore on the ship. He had goods, groceries. He sold fruits, vegetables, canned goods, imported goods. Very successful businessman, and he was elected by his community to what will be the equivalent of a city councilman. Now, one of the things that I found interesting is that when the whole Dred Scott hearing happened, a lot of these successful black freemen in the northern states realized that they did not have a future in the United States. No matter how successful they were, no matter how classy they were, no matter how dignified they were, Dred Scott was basically telling African people in the Americas, in the United States of America, that black men had no rights that white men were bound to respect. So he applied for a passport. And they denied him a passport. The commissioner of passports said, well, we can't issue a passport. Right after the Dred Scott case, we cannot issue a passport to a black man. Have you not read the Dred Scott case? These people are not citizens of the United States. So this man packed his family up and they relocated, emigrated home to Africa, went to Liberia, and he established himself there. Became an extremely wealthy merchant. He built such an imposing mansion on the St. Paul River that travelers used his home as a landmark. People who would be taking boats on the St. Paul River in those days, his home was a landmark to let you know where you were and how far it would be before you reached Monrovia. He grew cotton. He had a cotton gin. He made cloth. So not only did he farm, he also manufactured finished goods. Amassed a tremendous amount of wealth for himself when he was in Liberia. And like E.J. Roy and other successful people from the Northeast that we've discussed in the past, Holland went to Liberia with a lot of money. He went to Liberia with a lot of money. So this is one of the and the reason we don't consider this direct foreign, and like people like, oh, direct foreign investment. This is an African man who was essentially stateless. was not granted a passport to leave the United States. He went to Liberia and was welcomed because, as we know from past shows, Liberia was an asylum for oppressed African people. And it didn't only mean oppressed poor African people, but African people who were relatively wealthy and successful elsewhere that did not see that they could go any further with their ambition in the land where they were born. So he went to Liberia, established himself, established a farm, created jobs. And these merchants were also these wealthy people. Thomas Holland specifically, he and his wife ended up being, she was a teacher. They spent a lot of their resources advancing the education system as well in Montserrat.
And that's what I was going to add, because anyone watching this say, well, that was, how did it, like right now in Liberia, every time you go to Liberia, even when you want to run, they say, what did you do here? So how did his wealth benefit the people where he lived? He said,
right before I let Jabari come in, I'm going to say this. He wasn't trying to appease people or run for office. So this mindset that we have, when someone comes, we should be beggars and they should give us things so that we can vote for them. This guy had already won an election in the United States, which was next to impossible. And he achieved that. He was in Liberia to amass wealth. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. He was a capitalist. He wanted to make money. He created jobs. People worked for him. He had a manufacturing company.
right.
He had a farm. And because his wife was a teacher, they gave to schools. But in addition to that, these wealthy people were taxed. One of the things Liberians, and not just Liberians, that people need to understand is that when you have people who are successful like this, they have to pay back into the country, if they like it or not, through taxation. So we want successful, wealthy people who invest their money right where they are, as opposed to this idea we have that foreigners that are not living in Liberia, that have no citizenship in Liberia, should then come from Lebanon or Japan or wherever, extract and take back where they came from. Holland is buried in Liberia. He went to Liberia because that was the only country that he could be a citizen of. He went to Liberia because Liberia was established for men like himself. Jabari, did you want to say anything about Holland before we go on to the next one?
Not too much about Holland. Just context. During the 1850s, you had the Dred Scott case, but you also had the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which plays a huge role in why some people wanted to leave. That basically states that if you were living anywhere in the United States, especially in the northern states, that if you were a runaway slave or you were suspected of being a runaway slave, you could be resold back into slavery in the South.
Yes. So there's a lot going on, but this is not a full biography of Holland. We're just going to touch over different powerful merchants on the Grain Coast. We'll go on to the next slide, please, Dennis. And Jabari, you want to take over Urias Africanus McGill? I know that's one of your favorite people.
Yes. So this is Urias Africanus McGill. As you see, that is his what we call back in the day a daguerreotype. That's what photos used to be called back in the 1850s. One of the great merchants of Liberia. His father was named George and Angelina. They were from Baltimore, and they immigrated to Liberia when he was a young boy, when he was 8 years old. His father was, by profession, he was a preacher, clergyman. He was well off in when they arrived in Liberia, and that's going to play a pivotal role for the McGills, especially Urias, as he's going to rise similar to his father to great success. He's going to become one of the wealthiest merchants in Liberia. He's going to play a pivotal role in Liberia's early economic development. He creates a company called Urias and I think it's Urias McGill and Brothers. Mm-hmm. His brother Samuel McGill was Also, they refer to him in the documents in the African Repository as being Dr. McGill, so that he is very well esteemed in the community. We do know during that time, it was during the Industrial Revolution, what we call the first Industrial Revolution. People were manufacturing or doing some of that stuff, not doing necessarily factory work, but doing finished goods, and that's what they were doing. Especially they were getting into the palm oil trade that they were doing in the transatlantic, going both ways, United States, Liberia, and in other countries. So Horace McGill is very infamous, and he was very successful for his time, and he's one of the people I've always admired since I was a little kid. So that's a little that you know about Mr. McGill.
And Urias McGill was a very handsome guy. The whole family was extremely good looking. They if you go on to the next slide, Dennis, I could not find a picture of Samuel McGill, but his other brother, R.S. McGill. Now I'm not sure if this is Sam or if this is James. I think this R.S. might be Sam. Is that right? That was what I couldn't confirm, if the S was for Sam. But this is one of the McGill brothers, and he's identified as R.S. McGill on the photo. Now, I believe the S is for Sam. I'm not sure if this is actually Sam or if it's someone else with just the middle initial S. No, I'm sorry. Samuel is different from RS. Sorry about that. So this is RS. I don't have Samuel's picture, and I don't have James's picture. So anyway, Dennis or Jabbar, you can go ahead and read this.
James and Arias, a Methodist clergyman and teacher by profession, the elder McGill joined the ranks of Liberia's prosperous merchants, and in time his four sons followed his lead. By the early 1850s, Arias and James had formed a successful partnership under the name of Arias and McGill and Brother, and in 1854 they were joined by Brother Samuel and R.S. McGill to create the larger trading concern of McGill Brothers, embracing both transatlantic and African coastal trade, as well as a thriving commission business with numerous stores and warehouses. The McGill Brothers the McGill's firm played a principal role in Liberia's early commercial history and earned a handsome fortune for its partners.
So they were probably the most successful merchants because they had a conglomerate. I mean, there were many more. We're not even going to get into. The Uris were massive farmers and had a lot of wealth. They went to Liberia with a lot of wealth. There's many more that we're not going to talk about today. But of all of the merchants, even those others that went with wealth, E.J. Roy, the McGill brothers, these were the top. These were the top tier of wealth producers. They had businesses. They had a whole network of trade and industry and commerce. Through them, many of the distance traders from the north were able to bring goods into town, store them at their warehouses. The wealth that these guys created, the economic activity around their innovation, spread throughout the entire sub-region. So it wasn't only about the coast. Their trade also went inland. Though they didn't go inland traders brought goods because the McGill brothers were paying top dollar for trade. And it's important that I also emphasize that there was an economic embargo against Liberia. So a lot of these things that were going on, many of the Europeans were not even coming into our ports. They didn't want to trade with us. So these men created a network where they would take things out of the country themselves. I mean, imagine if they cut off trade with Liberia today. We don't even have the means to take things out of the country. We don't own ships. You know, this is not just about some guys opening a store in a warehouse. These are people that were engaged in transatlantic commerce. There is nothing like that today, comparable on the continent of Africa, where you have Africans owning. It would be the equivalent of owning a post-Panamax vessel, you know, that can, you know, those gigantic trading ships that are built by Chinese and others. These were Africans. These were Black men doing this tremendous business at this period of time. Just incredible.
Really incredible.
Yeah. So Sarah McGill was their sister, extremely beautiful, was married to Russ Worm, who was the publisher of the Liberia Herald newspaper. He was also extremely wealthy. So these are the some of the wealthiest, most successful Black people on the planet. They came from, these are many of them, not all of them, but many of them, like the McGills, came from the United States, relatively successful, and built, amassed wealth for themselves and had the economy growing in West Africa. So you can go ahead and read this about, this is your cousin, Dennis. This is your cousin. Go ahead.
Mr. Proud was born of Aborigines. His father, John Green Tubo Proud, was converted to Christianity and joined the Protestant Episcopal Church at the age of 25, under the preaching of Reverend C.C. Hoffman at Cape Palmas. His mother was given to Bishop Payne when only 6 years of age, but it was understood that she would return to her father, maybe, who was the grand devil of the bush. Her father.
Now what is so? I don't know what that means though.
Yeah, they miss, they equate dad to devil. But
yeah,
her father lived on the Kavala River, but after she was educated, she refused to return to heathenism and was married to John G. Proud. Their union brought 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. J.G.W. Proud was one of the wealthiest farmers in Maryland County. He later entered politics and was elected a representative in 1895.
So his story to me sounds so similar to that of James J. Dawson. Born of heathen parents, So we're clearly using the language from that time period because the stories of these people I'm taking out of primary sources and from the 1800s, and that's how people spoke. I don't know what a grand devil means. I don't know if that means he was some kind of Zoe or spiritual leader, or does it mean that he was a king? That is why I left it the way they described it, because I couldn't find out any more information about what his actual title would have been. But he must have been extremely powerful.
Right.
And then, so I'm talking about his grandfather. So this is the story of many, many Marylanders. Maryland was very much an assimilated place. We have Nettie C.A. Brownell has a similar background story, so many people. So, of course, one of my favorite people in Liberian history, J.J. Dawson, as I just mentioned, similar story and background as well. Right. Did you have anything you wanted to add about Mr. Proud, Jabari?
I do know that he did become a House of Representative representing Maryland County. At the time, it was around that, in the 1890s. So, there is a institute that was named after him. I think it was
I forgot about that. That's true.
So, he was really well known in Maryland.
Right. And what they call Grand Devil there doesn't exist in Maryland, but I can tell you because I'm from the Southeast.
I don't even know what they were talking about, homie. That's why I said that's your cousin. You got to translate. I was like, what does this mean? Was he a king? What exactly was he? So, whoever he was very powerful. Whether he was actually a devil or not, I don't know. Or maybe he was a medicine man. Who knows?
Yeah. It's a grand devil of the bush.
But he was, so far, these people have been extremely handsome. And then now we get to William H. Adams. I mean, everybody, Adams was, how they talk about the mulatto hegemony. Adams would have fit into this mulatto hegemony, or hegemony, as we pronounce it in Liberia. So this is a short sketch about William Henry Adams.
William H. Adams is the prince of all his country. He's the farmer, the merchant, and the leader in church. He came from Charleston, South Carolina, on the Azores in 1875. He was said to have been the leading farmer in Liberia. His mercantile operations were extensive. He had a limited education but ability to make and husband his resources. He was a leading member of the AME Church.
Yes. So this is another very successful farmer. Agriculture, this is the 1800s. Agriculture, land was and still is essentially the source of all wealth, right? So land, having access to be able to farm, to be able to extract resources from the land, and then also be able to manufacture goods. It's very important that we emphasize here, though they were exporting some raw materials, they really got their wealth through manufacturing, early manufacturing. Cotton into fabric. A lot of cloth was being produced. They called it calico from the north that they were bringing in, which is our country cloth. They were getting into doing their own cotton, their own production of sugar. I forgot to mention that about Holland. Holland had a sugar mill, and so did William H. Adams. So they also had sugar mills. Liberia was producing sugar at this period of time in the 1800s. All of this before Firestone came and turned us into a one-trick horse.
No.
You can go to the next slide, Dennis.
For Pusawa. William B. Grunt was a leading merchant of Brewerville. He was born on a plantation in Mississippi in March of 1851 to enslaved parents. He was liberated when Confederate General Lee surrendered to Union General Grant in 1865. His education was obtained by his own efforts. After teaching Black children for many years in Mississippi, he married and immigrated to Liberia, where he established a school for Native children. Through his connections with indigenous traders, he grew to become a leading merchant in Brewersville. He often went to England and spent months for recreation. You go, boy.
Yeah, so I love William B. Grunt. I love his story. I love the fact that this guy, I'm nothing against the McGill brothers or Holland or all of these rich guys that came from America. No, nothing against them. But there's something that moves me about a story of a man who was born into slavery, emancipated after the Civil War, learned how to read and made it his business to teach others in the United States how to read. So he was probably teaching newly emancipated children how to read and write. He's inspired when he gets married to go to Liberia. They open a school for indigenous children. Because they're teaching indigenous children, Gaunt then befriends some very powerful indigenous people who are distance traders. And they're coming with lots of goods. They're coming with palm oil, they're coming with gold, they're coming with ivory. And they're like, you know what, Gaunt? You're not a bad guy. You're helping our kids. You know what? We're gonna work with you. This guy was able to tap into a trade network, though he humbly went to Liberia just to teach, and was able to amass so much wealth for himself that he would go to the UK on vacation, for recreation. I mean, it's just a beautiful story.
I know.
Yeah, it's not to take away from the rich guys who came with money to invest, but he really, really did not have much when he arrived in Liberia, and he had humble beginnings. And I also admire the fact that many of these people were involved in education and teaching people, but this was actually Gaunt's life. He devoted himself to it, and even the woman he married was a teacher, who again devoted herself to this. So I can't say enough. He's one of my favorite people that we're doing this sketch about. We'll go to the next one, Dennis.
And he's telling us that not only government people can can go outside the country for recreation and
Right. And he never ran for office. I don't know if he has any descendants in Liberia. I'm sure he does. But yeah,
he was not petitioned to run too.
Oh, and then Honorable James L. Cox.
James L. Cox was born in Maryland County, Republic of Liberia, June 1854. His father was an immigrant from America and his mother was Grebo. James was the oldest of 6 children. He entered school at an early age, but his father did not live to see him educated. So he left school before completing his education to look after the support of his father's family when only 16 years of age. He learned the trade of a sawyer and thus obtained means working at his trade to support his mother. He enlisted in the War of 1875 between the Grebels and the Liberian government. He was wounded, but as soon as his wound was healed, he was found in line against the enemy.
Yes. So he had a sawmill. That's what a sawyer is. It's a person who has a sawmill and does woodwork. So building supplies, construction supplies. I mean, this guy was, involved in logging and not only raw logs going on a ship and leaving, but they were sawing these logs and turning them into building materials. He was also in the military, as it's clearly stated. So the language of saying 1875 between the Grebels and the Liberian government, we've kind of talked about this in the past, and it's where I'm speaking in the language of the time period. But when we say Grebels and the Liberian government, there wasn't just one group of Grebels who had the same mind doing the same thing. Clearly, there were Grebel people fighting on both sides of the war, and unfortunately, the casualties on both sides of the war were of the same ethnic group, Plow and Grebel people mostly. So this idea that, Grunt only being half Grebel, but there were many other Grebels who were Grebel fighting against the people who were trying to break away from the Republic. So I wanted to point that out again. And I don't really like the term enemy, but again, this is what William heard, this language he used, and so I'm just using the language from the time period.
Yeah.
Then we have J.G.W. Tway. Oh, I have the wrong name there, but this is J.G.W. Tway.
This is D12.
Yeah, J.G.W. Tway. Go ahead, Dennis.
J.G.W. Tway was born in Monrovia on April 14, 1879 to Crew parents from Nana Crew, Sino. In 1900, he left for the U.S. for education. Tway also helped Planino Biwala to gain admission into Mount Harmon Academy, a boarding school in the U.S., and wrote friends to financially help Wolo at Harmon. He was a wealthy businessman and coffee farmer with over 200 acres of farmland. In 1927, D12 became a representative in the Liberian legislature. He later converted his coffee farm to a rubber farm after receiving a Firestone grant of 5,000 rubber plants.
Yeah, and his land actually grew exponentially with the Firestone grant. I mean, we could do a whole story on J.G.W. but I'm going to really just summarize basically when Firestone, and I'm ending with J.G.W. because this tells the story of how our economy got annexed, basically in the between the 1920s and to the late 1940s. The entire country's economy at this point has been shifted from all of these different industries: sugar, coffee, logging, manufacturing, doing all these different things. Everything becomes grow rubber and sell it to Firestone.
Right.
If you were producing food before, you were producing rice in the northern central territory of Liberia before, everybody come off the rice farms and come clear the rainforest and make way for the rubber plantation. So even the indigenous people in the interior who were participating in producing food and other things to support the regional economy, they're being taken off of the farms and being put to work at Firestone. So the whole thing shifted where you had all of these wealthy merchants that used to be economically vibrant and viable are now all turning into suppliers for Firestone. It was horrible. And it is this that really, this marks the economic. D12's story is really, really tragic because he is one of those who thought Firestone coming was going to be a good thing for Liberia. And it broke him. There was not a lot of money in selling rubber to Firestone. He lost a lot of wealth, and so did many, many other Liberians. In fact, most of Montserrado that used to be prosperous up the St. Paul River, by the 1950s, all of those farms start to get abandoned because people no longer had an outlet for their own production. They had to now succumb to this one-trick horse, Firestone.
So and it's so sad, Carl, because if you're growing coffee or rubber, if you don't sell it, you can eat it. But now it's rubber. If you don't sell it to person, what else can you do with it?
Yeah. And there's no other buyer besides Firestone. Right. So our transatlantic commerce is broken down. Only Firestone is taking things in and out of the country. It was horrible. And we really should talk about that more. It's something that children, I think, should be educated about in school. Is, because a lot of people don't realize that this was really not a good thing for our economy. And we still have not recovered. There were some attempts in the 1970s, late 60s, 70s to try to come out from under this one-trick Firestone thing. But, we all know how that ended in 1980. But this is part of the problem. Was this D12 had been very productive, diversified in his production on a 12 farm, and it turned into a rubber plantation.
As far as in Duduka, my hometown, there's a rubber plantation there.
Yeah, I mean it's something that we should, it's a different story. But I just wanted to go over. This is a photo of one of the ships, a merchant ship, the Liberia Packard. It's an actual sketch from 1847 of the Liberia Packard. But we were trading goods. We were transporting people. Our ships used to go to Accra. Ships used to go to Freetown, to Dakar, and then across the Atlantic. So people would actually travel even from Lagos to Accra on Liberian vessels at this point in history. And we would trade goods up and down the coast as far back as even, when the trade embargo was very, very serious under President under Stephen Allen Benson's era, and Daniel Bishir Warner built ships kind of as a way to keep the economy going. Besides E.J. Roy later on having ships, President Warner, before he was president, he built ships to carry goods up and down the coast and people. And this was an amazing time economically for our country and inspiring. We have a lot to learn today from what these people achieved. And we also have a lot to learn from this direct foreign extraction that took place and continues to take place that we call investment.
Yeah.
So I think that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
Right, we have some questions here, but before, because these two names were mentioned here about D12 and Planino Biwala.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is told. Mm-hmm. This is a story of D12 and Biwala. So D12 returned first to Liberia with his master's degree. And mm-hmm. later, and the people were so excited. Master, so the crew people thought master was the end of all learning. Because D12 was the epitome of scholarship, right? So later on, Biwala came with PhD. So when they went to meet him, they said, what does he have? They say he had PhD. So people started leaving. They were disappointed because he didn't have master. So when D12 found out that why they were so disappointed, he said, because, he doesn't have master, he got PhD. He said, no, what he had twice what I have. So it's master. So the crew people asked, what he I say, Oble master, master. He said, oh, before they came back to even talk to Bewater. So since that time, the easier way to explain PhD to a crewman is master, master. Don't say PhD. So let's go to our some comments here called talking about Firestone. Jimmy Eastman said Firestone tappers to meet their production quota needed help from their children who were not employed by Firestone, total exploitation, tantamount to slavery. Original paper say greetings. Talking about the merchants or these business people, Jimmy said these people were exceptional as most families were still going barefoot up to the 1950s. Evers want to know if McGill is related to, if Nathaniel McGill is related to the McGill brothers.
Elvis, don't make me laugh. I'm just getting over my cold. Go find somebody else, somebody else to tease you. I beg you. Oh God.
Uriah McGill family was also mulatto. Was Honorable G. Welly a soldier?
No, the McGill family was not mulatto.
Let's get the last comment. Oh, they said the people in my village waiting for my master. No, don't be disappointed.
That's a great story. I wonder if it's true. I would like it to be true. I'll tell myself it's true.
I was told this story by Mr. Sai Nyokron Nyasio.
Was it that I accept that story as historical fact. That's awesome.
So if we fast forward, we name this Liberia's era of economic freedom. So will you say it was the coming in of Firestone that broke this, or what really happened?
Yes, of course. They tried to break this with
the embargo first.
The embargo, and what really started the issues was the Berlin Conference, when they had divided Europe, had divided Africa, sat and carved it, and then Liberia was sovereign. They couldn't carve Liberia. It becomes an issue. It becomes a thorn in the side of European imperialism, and it becomes more of a thorn in the side of European imperialism when other African countries can say, "But look at all these rich, successful, self-determinant people in Liberia." And then you have to remember that the Africans, the indigenous Africans in places like Sierra Leone and Guinea and Mali and Ivory Coast, are now able to circumvent the European-controlled coast and come into Liberia and trade at better rates, because the Liberians recognize their right to trade. Where within the colonies, Black men had no rights that white men were bound to respect. So Liberians were actually doing extremely well because the distance traders appreciated interacting with the Liberians, because they were getting more bang for they were getting better rates, better negotiations. They were trading with people who saw them as equals. And so this was also a problem. It was more difficult for Liberia, but when Firestone came in, it completely crushed everything. I mean, people think that the St. Paul River district of Liberia was abandoned because of the Civil War. No, it was abandoned long before the Civil War. Firestone destroyed Liberia's economy. There's no question about that. And after Firestone, we've had concession upon concession that are all similarly structured. Maybe not as massive as Firestone, but they pretty much have been similarly structured as a means to mostly extract and then, give little trinkets and aid, as opposed to trade. So instead of trading, now you have extractors and exploiters giving
Right.
aid. Trade is what grows an economy, not aid. And so these early Liberians understood that.
We love this A thing.
Fair aid instead of fair trade. Can you imagine? It's sad. It's really, it's unfortunate.
Well, Jabari, anything else you want to add before you come in? Yeah, go ahead.
No, all I would just say is many of the merchants, and especially from that time, were oftentimes many of them, some of them actually they grew up in slavery or they were witness to slavery. They immigrated um, with the mindset of they didn't want to experience that ever again. So they made sure they were economically self-sufficient. Many of them were versed in many different fields. A lot of them were outside of Monrovia. They weren't necessarily in Monrovia because oftentimes in today's Liberian society, everything is centered around Monrovia, and people don't think like Liberia was ever successful outside of Monrovia. So like Grand Cru or Sino in Maryland, and many of these merchants
Greenville.
were in Sino. Some of them were in Grand Cape Mount, like the Rosses were, and I think Adams was also in Grand Cape Mount. You had people in Millsburg. You had people in Sino, Bassa, all over the place. So, you know, just something to consider. It's not just Monrovia. They were successful all the way around.
And all the coastal cities that were trading, that had ports, all those coastal cities, they were reciprocal. I mean, they were where people would export their goods from. They were all trading towns: Harper, Greenville, Robertsport, Buchanan, Marshall, even. So it's unfortunate that many of those places have become a shell of the past, and it's again because of Firestone mostly. And then the whole shift becomes, instead of me creating wealth, I will go work for Firestone. I will go work for Lamco. I'll go work for Gong Mines. Instead of creating wealth, you now are selling your labor to a foreign entity instead of creating wealth for your own country. That was the shift. Very dangerous shift for our country. And one of the things I always like to remind people, Liberians, they love the phrase direct foreign investment, foreign investment. You will
Yeah.
never, ever, ever hear an American politician talk about foreign investment. It sounds like foreign occupation or takeover. It sounds like a threat to sovereignty. It's not that foreigners cannot invest in America. It is not a political uh, uh, mantra or political, slogan or catchphrase. It doesn't sound good in the ears of Americans because they know that they have to be the driving force behind the American economy. It doesn't block anyone else from doing business in America, but you better believe the predominant investors in America are going to be Americans. And that is how it once was in Liberia.
Once upon a time. So as we enter election season, I say Vote Focus on Liberia has the number one in TV programming. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Tomorrow, Thursday, join us for Tough Talking Thursday. Dr. Tefo Amos, his name did not make it on the list, so he dropped out of the race. He bowed out. What happened next? What happened? And what are your next steps, Doc? He will be on Tough Talking Thursday. We're going to talk tough and also talk about the political landscape. Please don't miss that. On Sunday, U.S. United States versus Stanton Witherspoon. Did Stanton enter a plea deal? What's in it? What does it mean? So every time we have these court issues and people are running around saying Stanton plead guilty or this, that, we want to call the lawyers to be able to talk about this. What does it mean when they say change of plea? What does that mean? And how does that pertain to the case? Join us this Sunday at 8 p.m. for FOL Justice Forum Here at FOL, we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberian. Well, Carl and Jabari, thank you so much for the night. Let's conclude because anyone listening to us today will say, "Hmm, that was then. What is now?" You know that whole idea of that business mindset. Uh, and there are still some successful business people in Liberia today. We
Yeah.
not because what most of the things we see are politics, but there are some Liberians that are doing good, just like the McGill brothers. So let's conclude. Jabari, let's start with you.
Economic independence and sovereignty is important. Without economic sovereignty, political sovereignty is only that. It's sovereignty in name only. It's not really true sovereignty because you don't control the means of production, therefore you don't control your livelihood. And many of these merchants wanted to control their livelihoods. They engaged in agriculture, they were doing manufacturing, warehouses, and it shows that you don't have to strictly be a politician or have to strictly, be in the ministries to be successful. You can be a business owner or own a cooperative and still be successful. So the biggest takeaway is there's more to being successful than just being a politician in the ministries.
Paul?
Yes, absolutely. So that was pretty much a mic drop. What Jabari said drops the mic. So we'll close on that. That's enough.
Thank you. We want to thank you again for coming. And always FOL, that's the place to be. Thank our viewers and even those who will watch later. Until then, we close with our song that says, "We are all Liberians." Have a good night and God bless you.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. USA, all we want. Liberia. USA, all we want. Liberia, Liberia.